All right, good morning. That's Uncle Lou here. That's right, it's me, Uncle Lou, live on YouTube for you. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. If you're new, I post college football videos almost every single day of the year. We do a bunch of live shows. We do call-in shows, all kinds of stuff. We have a really good time here. So make sure and subscribe. Over the last couple of weeks, I've done a series of coaching ranking videos. I went through each conference and sort of ranked the coaches from best to worst within each conference. And then after I did that, I made what I thought was, here's the top 10 coaches in all of college football. And then I did the worst 10. And I don't want to get back into that debate again. I'm not here to tell you my list was more right than anyone else's. That's just one idiot's opinion on YouTube. That's not really the point of this video. But right after I made that video, I think it was a day or two later, it was announced that the University of Georgia had restructured Kirby Smart's contract, giving him a raise and an extension, making him the highest paid college football coach in the country. The highest paid college football coach ever, really, at $13 million. $13 million average per year. And it got me thinking, if I were to take my list of top 10 coaches, what are those coaches being paid? How close? In other words, if I ranked here's the top 10 coaches in terms of what they're paid, how does that compare to who I think the top 10 coaches are? So I decided to do that, and that's what we're going to do. And we're going to look at a couple of different things. Which of these coaches do y'all think are most overpaid? Which ones are the most underpaid? Who's getting a really great bargain? I'll tell you, here's what I'm going to do. So here's my list of top 10 coaches. So this is the list I put out about a week ago of who I thought the best coaches were in all of college football, ranked 1 through 10. And you can see at Dan Lanning, Kyle Whittingham, Brian Kelly, Lincoln Riley, Dabo Swinney, Mike Norvell, Steve Sarkisian, Kalen DeBoer, Ryan Day, and Kirby Smart. Again, I'm not here to argue about that again. That's not the point of the video. What do each of these coaches make? How close is this list to a list of top 10 coaching salaries, right? Well, I had Kirby as the best coach. He's also the highest paid at $13 million. But some of these salaries here. So you got Kirby at $13 million. Dabo Swinney is actually the second highest paid coach in all of college football right now. And even though I've got Dabo Swinney listed down at 6 on my list, and he's the second highest paid, it's understandable to me why that is. The guy did win 2 national titles. Usually when you have a season like that, no matter what you're making and no matter what type of a contract you have or how long of a contract you have, you're going to get an extension and a raise after a season like that. He won 2 national titles in 3 years. He got a couple of raises and a couple of extensions. It's not a surprise to me. And honestly, I don't think Clemson is overpaying or whatever for Dabo Swinney. This makes perfect sense to me that he would be the second highest paid coach in the country. His average yearly salary right now, $11.5 million. One other thing real quick. There may be some fans of teams that show up in the comments of this video and say, you're wrong about such and such salary. He makes this much. Again, it's hard sometimes to find exact numbers of what these coaches make. I have checked probably a dozen different lists of coaching salaries in college football over the last hour this morning. Most of them have Dabo Swinney at $11.5 million. So that's where I'm getting that number from. Maybe he makes a little more. Maybe he makes a little less. Here's the other thing to consider. These numbers are averages per year over the length of the contract. And most coaching contracts increase per year. So let's say, for example, Kirby Smart's got a 10-year contract that averages $13 million a year. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to make $13 million this year. Maybe he makes $11 million this year, $12 million next year, then $13 million, $13 million, $13 million, then $14 million, then $15 million, whatever it is. These are the average yearly salaries over the length of the contract. So anyway, it's got Dabo, most places you look, as the second highest paid head coach in the country at $11.5 million. Continuing on after that, Kalen DeBoer. Now, this may be the first coach on here. We've talked about Kirby and Dabo. This may be the first coach on here where some people might not think this is deserved. Kalen DeBoer is a really good coach. He may wind up being the best coach in the country. We don't know. Obviously, he had 2 really good years at Washington, but it was just 2 years. Some of these other coaches on this list have been having years like that for a long time to get to earning this kind of money. Alabama threw a truckload of money at Kalen DeBoer. His average yearly salary with his contract at Alabama, $10.8 million, making him the third highest paid coach in college football. Steve Sarkisian at 4, $10.6 million. I'm a believer in Steve Sarkisian, but the naysayers or the doubters of Steve Sarkisian do have a valid point when they point out the fact that other than last year, he's kind of been underwhelming and disappointing and underachieving as a head coach. Now, the Sarkisian sort of supporters, if that's what you want to call it, kind of like myself, say, well, yes, Texas was talented when he got there, but they had, key holes or obvious holes in key places, and he's filled those holes in, developed depth. He's done things to sort of move Texas to the next level. I think Sarkisian and Texas are going to continue to be a top 10 program for the foreseeable future. I could be wrong. But it is true that he really had the one good season last year. And again, other than that, you look back at the previous Texas season, losses to Kansas. They hadn't won the Big 12 in a decade. Now, not all that is Sarkisian's fault, clearly, but it's not like he had a ton of success as a head coach somewhere else. And so they're paying him based off of that. That's not it at all. Now, Texas has money coming out of their ears. They can afford to pay this, but $10.6 million for Steve Sarkisian. Ryan Day, $10.3 million. Now, Ryan Day is probably the most polarizing coach in the country outside of maybe Deion Sanders. But Ryan Day is, well, you can see, I think he's the second best coach in the country. And I understand the criticism of Ryan Day. I heap it on myself. Look, no one has talked more trash about Ryan Day probably on the internet than I have. I mean, I don't agree with some of his coaching philosophies. They have been soft in the past along the lines of scrimmage, particularly on defense. I think it's ridiculous to play two-hand touch in the spring scrimmage game that they hold at the end of the spring. It is true they've lost to Michigan 3 years in a row. They haven't won the Big Ten for the last 3 years. He hasn't won a national title. He's 0-3 against the SEC. Like, all of those things are true. It's also true that he's got 8 losses total in 5 years. The guy averages less than 2 losses a year. And I understand that, you're Ohio State. We got to beat Michigan. We got to beat Michigan. If Ohio State goes 11-1 in every single regular season from now to the end of time, Ryan Day will be the coach from now to the end of time. No one is getting fired for going 11-1. But the losses to Michigan doesn't matter, especially now that we have a 12-team playoff. Doesn't matter at all. An 11-1 Ohio State, even a 10-2 Ohio State, which is the worst season he's ever had, is going to get into the playoffs 100% of the time. He's a really good coach. A really good coach, worthy of a top 5 salary, in my opinion. He's got the highest winning percentage in the history of college football. The guy knows what he's doing. He's got to make some changes. He's not perfect. He's got to find a way to beat Michigan. He's got to find a way to beat SEC teams, particularly if they match up in the playoffs. And he's got to win a national title at some point. But the idea that Ryan Day is a terrible coach or he should be fired if they go 11-1 again with a loss to Michigan is just insane. The guy's a really good coach. Again, he's not perfect. I've got my problems with him. But you get rid of Ryan Day, it's going to set you back. Lincoln Riley at 6. This one's a little controversial too because, again, we don't really know what Lincoln Riley makes per year because Southern Cal is a private university. They're not required to release this kind of information. Most of the places that you look have Lincoln Riley's salary in the $10 million range. Now, there's reports of houses being provided for him and different things like that if added to his salary would make the number larger. Basically, his salary is somewhere in the $10 to $12 million range, $9 to $12 million range. Most places, like I said, that I looked listed it at $10 million. I'm pretty sure there's going to be some Southern Cal fans that'll show up and say he makes more than that. I'm not going to argue with you. He probably does. But again, I only have the information available to the public because Southern Cal doesn't have to release their head coaching salary information, and most places have him listed in around the $10 million range. No matter how you look at it, he's one of the top 5 or 6 coaches in terms of salary in all of college football. He's won a bunch of conference titles. He's made the playoffs a bunch of times. Never won a playoff game, though. And that's sort of the next hump he's got to get over. And it didn't go well for him at Southern Cal in the first 2 years either. They had a decent season 2 years ago, but 2 losses to Utah, didn't win the Pac-12 title, didn't make the playoffs. I mean, if you're Southern Cal, you're not hiring Lincoln Riley to lose to Utah in the Pac-12 title game. That ain't why you hired him. You had a Heisman winning quarterback and couldn't win the Pac-12 2 years ago. I mean, that's bad. That's bad. And we all know the issues he's had defensively. So again, none of these coaches are perfect. Like, you can find criticism about all these coaches, but it makes sense to me, I guess, that Lincoln Riley is one of the top 10 highest paid coaches in all of college football. Again, a guy that's won a ton of games, a bunch of conference titles, has made a lot of playoffs. has struggled once he's got there, and he's, got to get over that hump. They're joining the Big Ten now, so I don't think the road's going to get any easier for Lincoln Riley, but we'll see how he does going forward. But he's making about $10 million a year. Mike Norvell at Florida State. This might surprise some people, and I know Florida State fans will know what he makes, but he makes $10 million a year. And some people are going to say, well, outside of last year, what has he done? Well, nothing. Now, he did inherit a bad situation at Florida State coming off the Willie Taggart years. The guy was a disaster. He didn't recruit. He couldn't coach. He didn't know what he was doing. He ran players off. The fan base was alienated. He did walk into a bad situation. And to Florida State's credit, they were patient with Mike Norvell because it wasn't an immediate turnaround. Mike Norvell's not a miracle worker. He didn't come in and snap his fingers and turn Florida State into an ACC title contending team. That didn't happen. He built it kind of the old school way with some transfer portal mixed in. And when I say old school way, I mean a 3 or 4 year window, right? We want success immediately, especially when a new coach is hired. That didn't happen there, but over time, he's got them to the point where they're at now, which is a 12-0 regular season, 13-0 after the ACC championship win against Louisville, barely missing out on the playoffs last year before getting annihilated by Georgia in the Orange Bowl, 63-3. But he makes $10 million a year. I had him in my top 10 coaches. I had him at number 5. Part of the reason I have him so high is because of the bad situation he inherited. There's a lot of coaches on this list who walked into a lot better of situation than Mike Norvell did. Kirby Smart walked into a pretty good situation at UGA. They were coming off of a 9-3 season, 10 after a bowl win. Now, Georgia hadn't won the SEC in like a decade when Kirby got there, but he didn't walk into a 5-win team. Ryan Day walked into an absolutely loaded team after Urban Meyer had another fake medical condition and had to fake retire for the umpteenth time. Sarkisian at Bama walking into a gold mine, right? Dabo Swinney, now he's literally swept the pieces of what was left of Clemson up out of the gutter and built it up from nothing to where it is now. So he's probably the coach on here, Dabo Swinney, who Mike Norvell is closest to in terms of what he had to deal with when he walked into that coaching situation at Florida State. There was nothing left of the Clemson football program when Dabo got there 15 years ago, and we have seen what he's done. We've seen what he's done there. But Mike Norvell, $10 million a year. Brian Kelly at LSU, $9.6 million a year. This is another guy. He kind of gets talked about the same way that Ryan Day gets talked about. Now, he's not as good of a coach as Ryan Day, in my opinion. He doesn't have the number of wins. He doesn't have the winning percentage. He doesn't have the conference championships. He doesn't have playoff wins. He doesn't have any of that. But the way people talk about Brian Kelly is very similar to the way they talk about Ryan Day. Oh, he wins a bunch of games, but he loses every time they play somebody good, or, he can't win the games that matters, or and look, there's a lot of truth to that. That people didn't make that up out of thin air. I mean, when he was at Notre Dame, he was there for 11 or 12 years. He averaged 10 wins a year, but he didn't win a single major postseason game, not one. They were actually in the ACC fully for 1 year. Notre Dame made the ACC championship game and got blown out. They made several New Year's Six games, got blown out. They made the playoffs twice, got blown out. They made the BCS National Championship game way back in 2012, got blown out. They haven't, so there's valid criticism about Brian Kelly. But the reality is the guy's been a Power 5 head coach for 15 or 16 years and averages 10 wins a year. That is not easy to do. He's a good coach. You can argue maybe where you would put him within the top 10, but I really don't think there's a serious argument that can be made that he's not one of the best 10 coaches in football, and so probably deserves to be on this list of highest paid coaches in college football at $9.6 million. Lane Kiffin surprises me. Lane Kiffin, look, Ole Miss had a good year last year. They were pretty good the year before that. And Lane Kiffin's a decent head coach. Should he be one of the top 10 highest paid coaches in the country? No. Lane Kiffin is the perfect example of someone who is benefiting from the college football arms race that we are in right now. This age of TV contracts and the schools being flooded with money, and they don't have to give any of it to the players because they're not allowed to. All the NIL money and everything comes from private individuals and collectives on the outside. These schools are just hoarding all this money. And what are they doing with it? They're giving Lane Kiffin $9 million a year. No division titles, no conference titles, did finally get a New Year's Six win last year. over who'd they beat? Was it Penn State, or was that even a New Year's Six win? Anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is, when you look at the other coaches that are making this kind of money, most of them have more accomplishments than Lane Kiffin. If you look at all the coaches we've talked about so far, Brian Kelly has made the playoffs twice. Lane Kiffin hadn't sniffed it. Mike Norvell has a conference championship. Lane Kiffin does not. Lincoln Riley, a bunch of conference championships and a bunch of trips to the playoffs. Can't say that about Lane Kiffin. Ryan Day, Big Ten titles, playoff trips, playoff wins, you name it. He's got it, other than a national title. Sarkisian, conference title, made the playoffs. Kalen DeBoer, conference title, made the playoffs, won a playoff game. And then, of course, Dabo and Kirby Smart. Lane Kiffin's the first coach we've got to on this list who really has no major accomplishments. Now, he's at Ole Miss. They're not some kind of traditional power. They were good back in the 50s. They won a handful of SEC titles, during segregation in black and white TV days. But, the last 40 years, they've been a pretty bad program. And Lane Kiffin has got them back to respectability. No question about it. I'm not here to knock Lane Kiffin. I've come on here plenty of times over the last 6 months and told you Lane Kiffin's a good coach. I was wrong about him in the beginning. I didn't think he would succeed at all. I was completely wrong. He's a good coach. Does he deserve to be one of the highest 10 paid coaches in the country? I don't know. This is a prime example of a team overpaying for somebody because they've just got more money than they know what to do with there with Lincoln Riley. I mean, with Lane Kiffin. The 10th highest paid coach in the country is John Hopeful. Our buddy at Tennessee, Josh Heupel. Wow, $9 million a year. There's no difference between him and Lane Kiffin. You can't find one. They've got the same accomplishments, and they lack the same accomplishments. No division titles, no conference titles. Tennessee's got one New Year's Six win a couple of years ago against Clemson, right? $9 million. Again, if this was a decade ago, John, this guy wouldn't be making anywhere close to $9 million. He just wouldn't. But because these schools are flush with cash, they got more money than they know what to do with. They're overpaying for coaches. And honestly, in the case of Tennessee in particular, I really don't blame them here. He is a way better coach than anybody they've had in the last 15 years. They had a revolving door of terrible fucking coaches at Tennessee during the entire 2010s. They get John Hopeful in there, Josh Heupel. He even halfway looks like he knows what he's doing. They throw a Brinks truck at him to lock him down. And I honestly don't blame Tennessee, so I'm not even trash talking this salary here. So that's the top 10 salaries in all of college football. Now, you compare those names to who I had here as the top 10 coaches in all of college football. I don't see Dan Lanning on here. Now, he hasn't been around very long. He's only been a head coach for a couple of years, so I get that. The one that I don't get is Kyle Whittingham. If you want to know who the most underpaid coach in America is, it's Kyle. I'm going to tell you what Kyle Whittingham is making per year, and it is going to blow your fucking mind. I want you to keep in mind that Lane Kiffin and Josh Heupel are making $9 million a year. Now, I know the SEC gets a ton of TV money. Okay, I get it. And Kyle Whittingham being at Utah in the Pac-12, they haven't had access to that type of TV money. The guy's making $4.7 million a year. 4.7. This is the biggest bargain in all of college football. Kyle Whittingham at $4.7 million a year. Maybe there's a Utah fan that's going to come in here and tell me this number is wrong. Again, he received a contract extension at the end of the 2022 season, and this is it. His base salary is $4.7 million. If it's gone up since then, somebody can let me know, okay? But they didn't do great last year, so I doubt he got another extension after 2023. This is the most recent one I can find. $4.7 million for Kyle Whittingham. The list of accomplishments that Kyle Whittingham has dwarfs anything you'll find in Lane Kiffin or Josh Heupel's bio combined. Multiple Pac-12 titles, multiple New Year's Six games. Now, they've never made the playoffs. They've been close, and they didn't make the playoffs, but they've done everything but that. At Utah, he's beat the soul out of Lincoln Riley for 3 years in a row. Or 2 years in a row. He's beat him 3 times. He beat him twice in 2022. Once in the regular season, once in the Pac-12 title game. He beat him again last year. He's 3-0 against Lincoln Riley, who has Southern Cal resources. Southern Cal recruiting base. And Lincoln Riley is making $10, $11, $12 million a year and losing to this guy every time they play at 4.7. Now, I still have Lincoln Riley ranked a little bit ahead of Kyle Whittingham on my list here because accomplishments have to matter. And Lincoln Riley's just got a lot more than Kyle Whittingham does. But head to head, Kyle Whittingham is embarrassing Lincoln Riley. $4.7 million. This is the best deal in all of college football right here. This is the best deal, period. I don't know if there's a school in the country that wouldn't hire him tomorrow for 5.7 million. They just say, we'll give you $1 million. I want you to think, what team are you a fan of? Okay. Now, if you're a fan of one of these teams that we've talked about here, Georgia, Ohio State, LSU, you've got one of these, top 5 or 6 coaches or whatever. You may want to keep your coach and say, nah, don't want Kyle Whittingham. But what about the other 125 teams in the country? How many of the other 125 teams would not hire Kyle Whittingham tomorrow for $6 million a year, $7 million a year? That would still be a bargain compared to what everyone else in this top 10 list is making. Let me ask you something. Let me ask you something. What in the fuck is Florida? $7.3 million. The guy hasn't had a winning record ever at Florida. He's losing record every year there. So, I mean, that's just one example. But he might be the most overpaid coach in all of college football. Billy Napier, $7.3 million a year. 1-1 against Vandy, winless against Kentucky. Losing to Florida State, Georgia every year. Can't beat LSU. Losing record both years at Florida. Getting out recruited by almost everybody in the SEC. They're like 9th in the SEC in recruiting. That might be the most overpaid coach in the country. Billy Napier, $7.3 million a year. Kyle Whittingham, $4.6 million. Florida, would you trade Billy Napier for Kyle Whittingham right now, yes or no? If you say no, you're lying to yourself. You're lying. You're just lying. Anyway, who do y'all think is the most overpaid coach in the country? Who do you think it is? Who do you think's the most underpaid? Is there somebody besides Kyle Whittingham that you would throw into this mix here? I happen to think Kyle Whittingham is the most underpaid coach in the country. I think Billy Napier is the most overpaid. I would rather pay $9 million for Lane Kiffin or Josh Heupel, like Ole Miss and Tennessee are doing, than to save a couple $1 million and get Billy Napier. But anyway, who do y'all think's the most overpaid? Who do you think's the most underpaid? Did any of these salaries surprise you? Let me know down below. Have a good morning.